We're here for another episode of the BioHub. Our guest today is CEO of dermatology company Arcutis, where he has been since its founding in 2016. During that time, they have done multiple successful raises at a $160 million IPO and have developed more than 2 FDA-approved products, with a third being reviewed. Before this, he was COO and co-founder of Kanan Therapeutics, and before that, VP of Strategy and Corporate Development of Kythera. He also held numerous exec roles throughout his time at Amgen and Eli Lilly, and was involved in the development and marketing of 3 approved drugs. He was also commissioned officer in the US Navy Reserves for 25 years. Please welcome Mr. Frank Watanabe. How are you, Frank?
I'm good. Thanks, Max. How are you?
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to have you. It really is.
It's
really
great to be here.
Yeah, great. Let's jump straight into it. So let's start at the beginning of your career with Eli Lilly, before nearly 10 years at Amgen as well. Talk me through the decision to leave Big Pharma and what the transition was like into small biotech.
Sure. So, really my decision to move from Big Pharma into biotech was driven by a desire to be part of smaller, more nimble organizations. I think Big Pharma is a great place to learn the art of drug development and commercialization, and both Eli Lilly and Amgen were wonderful training grounds. But ultimately you're a part of a large bureaucracy. It's difficult to make decisions. They happen very slowly. And I wanted something much more entrepreneurial, fast-paced, nimble, and so chose to move to the biotech side of the business. The transition actually for me was pretty smooth. The company I joined, Kythera at the time, had a lot of other refugees, let's say, from Big Pharma, including a lot of Amgen folks. And so they, knew what the experience was like making the transition. And we've hired over the years at Arcutis a number of folks from Big Pharma companies as well. I think for the right person, that transition does not have to be difficult. There are people who don't like the risk of biotech, and we've had people either turn down jobs with us or to go back to Big Pharma again after some period of time. But for those folks who enjoy the risk and who enjoy accountability and empowerment, I think biotech is really a great place for someone to just spread their wings, let's say.
Yeah, I agree, because for me, it's a question that comes up a lot. If I'm looking for a VP of business development or even a medical director, this conversation of someone being able to transition from Big Pharma to maybe hands-on small biotech, that kind of thing, is spoke about to be quite hard. But I think you're right. If you get the right personality, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think, one of the most important things is when you're part of a big organization, there are hundreds of people around you to support you, and everything from, IT to HR to, Amgen had a beautiful gym on site, all these other things. You go to a smaller startup, and particularly the early days, I used to joke that CEO stood for Chief Everything Officer. I was IT, HR, finance, meeting schedule, the travel planner, and you just have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and do it rather than delegating to someone else or just having it there ready for you, ready made, right? And that can be a bit of a mindset shift for folks, but the basic DNA of what we do is not that different from what Amgen does or what Lilly does or what Pfizer does. It's just in a different context.
Yeah. And during your time at Big Pharma, I imagine you picked up loads of different job titles, job roles to almost prepare you for that in a way. Or is that the case?
I was very fortunate that, I think particularly my time at Eli Lilly, Lilly is a wonderful people development organization. And they moved me around quite a bit in different roles and even in different geographies to develop me. And then, at Amgen, I also had an opportunity to work in a variety of different areas and then work cross-functionally as well in product development. So all of that gave me a very broad perspective on and experience with the various facets of the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice. And from that, then what led you to Arcutis and inspired you to join them?
Sure. It's an interesting story. I was actually pitching the lead investors in Arcutis on a different business idea. And they said, well, Frank, that's a really interesting idea, but we have this other thing we want you to do. We've got this dermatology company that we're starting up and we need a CEO and we want you to come in and join. And, I was a little skeptical because I was working on my other project, but they asked me to meet with the two other guys who were at the company. And, after meeting the other two gentlemen, the chief technical officer and the chief medical officer, I decided I wanted to work with these two individuals. And so decided to join the company, abandoned my other project and joined Arcutis.
So there was no search for progression in terms of a CEO position or anything like that, almost just...
No, the investors and I have known each other for many, many years. And given my background, the fact that I had known dermatology as well, I think, was one consideration in them approaching me and asking me to take the job. But there wasn't a formal search or something like that, no.
Yeah, I think sometimes that's the best way of doing it. If you know people, they get along. That's almost the hardest part of what I do. I can, if you say, Max, find a position, I will be able to find qualified people, but then the other half of the job is finding the people that then connect.
Yeah.
So if you've got that, like you say, it makes it so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly in a small company, there's no hiding when there are only 3 people in the company.
Yeah. How many people are you now?
We're about 300.
Wow.
So we grew very rapidly. We tripled in size every year for the first, I think, 6 years, and then we about doubled in size last year.
Yeah. Wow. Moving on to the focus, dermatology, which is often overlooked in discussions. Why do you think dermatology is important, and what are the challenges in gaining recognition?
Yeah, so I think dermatology is often overlooked or deprioritized because of this perception that they aren't life-threatening. It's not going to kill you the way cardiovascular disease or cancer will, even diabetes. But while that's true, I think that in many respects, dermatology diseases can be as impactful or even more impactful to the people suffering from them. Because, if you think, most diseases are not visible to others around you, right? If you have high cholesterol or cancer or diabetes, no one actually knows unless you tell them, right? Or, you're shooting up insulin, someone sees you injecting insulin. But with the dermatologic disease, they're often very visible. You think about something like vitiligo, which occurs oftentimes on the face, or plaque psoriasis, or seborrheic dermatitis, which we just launched a drug for treatment of seborrheic dermatitis. People see that, and it changes the way that they perceive you and act towards you. Seborrheic dermatitis, for example, oftentimes people are perceived as being unclean because of the scale that the disease causes, not, because they're not practicing good hygiene, it's because they have this disease, right? And so that creates a lot of stigma, a lot of psychosocial issues, can impact relationships, work, whole range of different things. So very severe quality of life impact many times for the patient. And so while it won't kill you, it certainly will completely change your life in a very negative way. And, one of the things that we talk about when we talk about our company and our programs is to remind people about those psychosocial aspects of the disease and how profound those can be for patients. Or in the case of atopic dermatitis, for example, where we have a drug in front of the FDA right now for atopic dermatitis or eczema, that often occurs in children. And so the impact is on the entire family. If the child can't sleep at night, just the burden on the parents of seeing their child suffer, right? You can imagine how profound an impact that can have on someone.
Yeah. So do you see the tide changing in a way in terms of?
I think there probably is. And I think that, the investments that some of the larger companies are making in this direct-to-consumer advertising is helping to raise awareness as well. But I think that it's a big societal shift. If you haven't talked to someone who has a dermatologic disease, you may not really appreciate just how profoundly these people are affected by the diseases that they're suffering with.
I agree. I think that's such a big point. When you think of cancer, for example, everyone's had a loved one, at least, who's suffered, which is why, probably it's out there. If you had the same kind of thing in dermatology, maybe people have, then yeah, I could see why that is the case, basically. But actually leads really nicely. So what advancements are we seeing in dermatology, and what do you expect the future to look like?
Yeah, I think there's been a real burgeoning of innovation in the dermatology space over the last a couple of decades, and I think it's really accelerating now. Earlier on, a lot of those developments were, I would say, secondary to other areas. So, for example, the development of the TNF inhibitors were originally developed for rheumatoid arthritis, and then they eventually migrated into dermatology. Those were game-changing drugs for patients with psoriasis. More recently, we're starting to see drugs being purpose-built for dermatology diseases like the IL-17, the IL-23 antibodies. And the success of those drugs then is leading to the development of other drugs in the space. What we have also seen, though, is there's been a real focus thus far on more severe patients and more expensive therapies, right? All of the drugs I mentioned are biologics. What we're starting to see now is more development of new drugs for less severe, mild to moderate severity diseases, or patients with mild to moderate disease as opposed to more severe disease, and more topical treatments, which you obviously can treat topically dermatological diseases, and less expensive drugs in some cases too. So you're serving maybe a less severe population, but you're able to serve a lot more people in that respect. And I think going forward, we're starting to see interest in some less common, but really very, very severe diseases. I think of prurigo nodularis is one disease, for example. But we're seeing a number of diseases, not necessarily Arcutis, but the pharmaceutical industry in general is starting to pay attention to some of these more uncommon diseases and develop new therapies for those drugs as well. And these are patients who, in many cases, haven't had new options for a long time. The drug that we just launched, we actually announced availability of the drug in the formularies this morning, the pharmacies this morning. There hasn't been a new drug for this disease in over 20 years. And so, you're starting to see this pickup in innovation in the dermatology space, which is so important for the people who are suffering from the disease and the dermatologists who are treating them.
Yeah, I think that says it all. That definitely says it all. And diversity in clinical trials is crucial for understanding effectiveness across all populations. Is there an issue across the industry in patient diversity, and why is it so important for you at Arcutis?
Yeah, I think that the whole issue of clinical trial diversity is definitely an important one, a real one. And I don't really think of it as a social equity issue either. It's a medical issue. And this is particularly true, for example, in dermatology. Many skin diseases look different on someone with very dark skin as opposed to someone with light skin. So, for example, you're fairly light skin. Disease that might present as reddish on you on a very dark skinned individual may not be terribly visible, or might appear purple instead, just because of the difference in the skin tone. And so the diagnosis can be different, but then also the drug's efficacy can be different because, you're partially looking at the visible manifestations. That's how we evaluate many of these diseases in dermatology, is from the appearance of the skin. And so giving doctors information on how does this drug work in a light-skinned individual and a medium-toned individual and a dark-skinned individual is absolutely critical to their ability to make informed decisions about the clinical utility of a particular drug. And so, it's something that at Arcutis, we've made a very serious commitment to. And I think a lot of companies talk the talk, but the question is, well, what are you doing about it? And we've done a number of things. I think probably the most notable thing is picking investigators for our clinical studies who live in areas with high ethnic representation, and ideally picking investigators who are themselves ethnically diverse, right? So, for example, we use Florida and Texas a lot in our clinical studies because there's very high Hispanic populations there. And so we're able to get good Hispanic representation. It's a little less geographically constrained, but you have to think carefully about where you place sites if you want to get African-American enrollment. And by focusing on who the investigators are and thinking about enrollment of patients based on the investigators, we've been able to really significantly improve the diversity in our trials. I think the last several trials that we've run, we were under 50% just straight white patients, which is quite unusual. very high representation. We've had some, African-American, over 20% representation, good Asian representation, very good Hispanic representation. But it only comes through these very deliberate, concerted efforts to ensure that you have a greater diversity in your trials.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I really do. That's probably one of the most comprehensive ways of going about it that I've heard. I suppose across the whole biotech industry, do you think there's an issue, or do you think there's been enough done about it?
Yeah, I think it is an issue. And I think it's an issue that the industry has recognized. And now the question becomes, what do we as an industry do about it? For example, I know that both pharma, which is our trade association for big pharma companies, and bio, which is our trade association for smaller companies like mine, have work streams looking at this. But companies really have to take ownership of fixing the problem. I think with time, for example, in our case, it's easier for us now to go out and do studies because we've worked with these investigators who we know have the right patient populations and we know can enroll in the clinical studies. When we first started out, in many cases, we were having to go finding doctors and training them to be clinical investigators because we couldn't find the right person who was an already experienced investigator. The more the industry focuses on it, the more I think this problem will fix itself. But we are making headway.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I suppose that now we're moving a little bit away from Arcutis and on your own approach to your own career and mindset and all of that. So how do you approach career planning, and what advice would you offer to individuals aspiring to build successful and fulfilling careers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll back up a little bit in my history. As a younger man, I had a wonderful mentor, this fabulous Scotsman by the name of Alan Clark, who was the head of Eli Lilly USA at that point. He'd been the head of Lilly UK for many, many years. And he asked me one day, he said, "Where do you want to be in 10 to 15 years?" And I looked at him like he had two heads. And he said, "Look, Frank, you have to think of your career strategically. You have to think about the destination and not the next step you're going to take." Alan used to like to say that people bumped into their careers in the dark. And so he taught me an approach, I would say, to career planning where you think about a long-term goal in your career. And once you identify that long-term goal, you can identify the skills and experiences that are expected of someone in that target role, the desired role. And you can work backwards from there and say, okay, which skills and experiences do I already have? And which ones do I need to acquire? And then how am I going to acquire them over the next 2 or 3 roles maybe that I'm going to be in? And if you methodically use this strategic career plan, by the end of 2 or 3 assignments, you've acquired all of the required skills and experiences. And then, you're a no-brainer for that next step, whatever your targeted role is, right? And it was a wonderful way of approaching career planning. And I adopted it, and I've been using it in my whole career, as opposed to, I think people tend to focus on what the next step is. And that means, you are zigzagging or you're going in the wrong direction to what your ultimate career goal really should be. So thinking more strategically, I think, really accelerates one's career development, and it makes it much more likely that you're actually going to reach your targeted destination.
Yeah. And how much did you use that philosophy in the growth of Arcutis as well? Because I suppose it's like long-term vision and then dissecting that into, shorter term goals and what makes sense. Yeah,
we certainly, I advise folks to take this approach. I think it's something that each individual needs to take and drive themselves, because sometimes those roles, those future roles, maybe the next 2 or 3 roles, won't be at Arcutis, or the opportunity to pursue them won't be at Arcutis, or they won't be at the right time. So this is something really that the employee needs to drive in collaboration with their supervisor, with their company. But it may mean changing companies in order to achieve one's career goals, which, by the way, I'm okay with, right? That everyone who works at Arcutis came from somewhere else, right? So I've poached a bunch of people. And when folks move to other companies for better opportunities or because the timing is right for them, we're always sorry to see people go. But I think that's an important part of developing people is recognizing that sometimes the best fit is with another organization. But we certainly do encourage folks to take a strategic approach to their career. And it's something that I talk about explicitly with my direct reports and with the other individuals who I happen to mentor at the company.
I think that's a great mindset. Probably not enough companies do that as well, almost rather selfishly trying to keep people and things like that. But yeah, I think that's a brilliant mindset.
Employee retention is important, and we obviously spend a lot of time and money on retaining, especially our best talent. But I also do think that one has to look at the bigger picture. I think, for example, we had one of our senior VPs move to another company recently, and we promoted internally to replace her. And part of the reason for that was her decision to move was that the woman that we had been developing to backfill her was ready, and one of the two of them was going to leave, right? Because you don't have two positions like
yeah.
that. And after some discussion, she said, I think I want to go do something differently, and so is ready to take on my role. So let's go ahead and do this. And I said, yeah, okay. And I'm sorry to see you go, but that makes sense.
I think that's a great story. It's almost like you spoke earlier about your mentors and how they got there. And, it's almost a pride in that way. Yeah, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most satisfying things, I think, of being a leader is seeing the people that you've developed and mentored over the years progress in their careers. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what are the most significant challenges you faced throughout your career, and how have they shaped where you are now?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges was that, I had a prior career as a military officer and a government official, and joining pharma was a big change, right? I didn't study biology. I hadn't worked in sales previously either. And so I had a very, very steep learning curve when I first came into the industry, and I had to immerse myself in everything about the pharmaceutical industry in order to get up to speed pretty quickly. And that didn't happen overnight. That took a number of years, but it was a great deal of effort early on in my career to become competent, I would say. I think one of the other things kind of related to that is, I spent most of my career in either in the commercial space or in general management. And so, I don't have an MD. I'm not an engineer. I don't understand clinical development as well as, the folks who do clinical development. I don't understand manufacturing as well as the folks who do manufacturing. And that's true, I think, of everyone in this industry. It's one of the things that makes pharma industry or biotech so interesting is how complicated it is. And frankly, I think the best solution to that is recognizes that you can't be the expert of everything, and surround yourself with really good people who are the experts on those things and leverage them. And that's not just at the CEO level. I think back to, my time at Amgen when I was working in product development, leaning on trusting my cross-functional partners in clinical development or manufacturing were really critical to my ability to do my job, because I needed to leverage their expertise, just as they needed to leverage my expertise to help them do their job effectively. And being good cross-functional partners, I think, is one of the keys to being really successful in this industry, because of the complexity and because of the specialization that we all develop over our careers.
Yeah, I mean, that comes down to the people as well, doesn't it? Having the right people around you. And then we spoke about that culture aspect earlier, which then obviously means the trust between you all and relying on each other. And obviously that's much bigger, I think, at least from what I see in smaller biotech compared to big pharma.
I think that's
true. Of you, you're taking on more roles and so on.
Yeah, and again, in many cases, you don't have the established processes. You don't have the infrastructure that you do at a big pharma company. So yeah, I agree that I think that the biotech really puts a premium on that cross-functional collaboration. But also, again, that's one of the things that makes biotech fun.
100%. Yeah, I think that's one word to describe biotech, isn't it?
Fun.
You look at the volatility over the last few years, and fun.
If it was easy, everyone would do it, right? But I think, like, when I get a chance to talk to the people who use our product and hear what an impact it's had on them, that's really what gets me up and keeps me going. But I enjoy my job. It's really fun, and being able to make a good living doing something that's inherently valuable, like helping people with disease, is also part of the fun, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So we're talking about management and leadership and how they're often interchangeable, but they have distinct characteristics. How do you differentiate between management and leadership?
Yeah, I think at a very simple level, right? I think leadership is about movement and change, right? Really, leadership is about aligning people around a mission of some kind, and then getting everyone moving towards that mission. Management is much more about control and stability and consistency, and so I think you need both in an organization, right? Because otherwise, you just have chaos. You think. Like I suspect that Tesla or Twitter probably has more leadership than it has management at the moment. Let's just say, right? But you want to have that balance, and I think it's difficult to be both as an individual, right? I think people tend to be. My experience has been people tend to be more strong in leadership or more strong in management. It's not so common to find someone who really excels at the same time in both. So again, it comes back to your earlier point about getting the right people in the right places. And, you ideally want to have a leader leading your company, but then you need to have some very good managers kind of coming along behind the leader and not cleaning up the mess, but organizing things and making things, that the trains are running on time and everything is being done properly. And I think that both are acquired skills, right? Some people are just born with leadership, but you can learn to do either. And, to some extent you can go back and forth and flex both of those muscles as well. But it's important to understand what the two roles are and when you need one role versus the other.
Yeah. So I suppose in like layman's terms, what is leadership and the difference to management? Maybe like an example or something. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, sure. So, maybe like if I were to use a ship's analogy, right? The leader is like the captain of the ship who's going to pick where the ship is sailing, and management is the navigator who makes sure that the ship actually gets to that location.
Get you. Yeah, nice. So yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite topics, mainly because I think I personally struggle with a work-life balance. So balancing a demanding career with personal life is a challenge for many professionals. How do you personally approach work-life balance, and what advice would you give to others in biotech and pharma?
I think it's a struggle for everyone, particularly people who have demanding jobs. I think the first step is recognizing that it is a challenge and owning that that's a challenge that you and only you can fix, right? Your management, your company can be supportive, but at the end of the day, each and every individual is accountable for making their own work-personal balance and deciding what the right work-personal balance is too, right? Some people need a lot more personal time. Some people need less personal time. So once you've said, okay, this is something that I'm going to control, I think it's important to establish a pattern and to set some boundaries. And I think, particularly in the COVID world and Zoom, people working from home, there is the ability to work 24/7. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should, right? And I think defining boundaries around yourself so that you don't end up working 24/7 is really important. Setting certain times when you're going to start work and stop work, and that doesn't have to be a traditional, I think, 8 to 5 kind of paradigm anymore. Again, especially with more hybrid or virtual work, where maybe you work in the morning and you work in the evening, you take the afternoon off instead. If that works for you, great. I tend to work most days, but not necessarily 8 hours, right? I don't work 8 hours on the weekend, but I do work a little bit. And then I might take some time off during the week because that works well for my job and for what my personal demands are. And then I think I would say the other key thing is, particularly for younger people, I think, people tend to be ambitious. You're early in your career trying to prove yourself. One of my favorite aphorisms is no one ever said on their deathbed they wish they had worked more, right? And I think it's important to kind of keep that in perspective. I have 2 sons. One is grown, one's going off to college next year. And I would say probably one of my greatest regrets in life is not having spent more time with them when they were kids, because I was busy with work. So, don't feel guilty about taking an afternoon off, or making sure that you get to that play or that sports that sports competition. Spend time with your kids, spend time with your loved ones, because that's time that you're never going to get back. You really only have one chance at it. And particularly, again, when people are younger and younger parents, I think work often takes priority too much.
Yeah. And I think the kids aspect is quite important, especially for young people who they're not at that point yet. Bill Gates actually said that, he, before fatherhood, he said, I don't believe in weekends. I don't believe in holidays. And that was something he put onto his employees. But, when he became a father, that's actually when he said, I wish I'd spent more time with family, and his son really put everything into perspective.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I would say I had a very similar, I don't know if I was as extreme as Gates, but I had a very similar arc in my career. And, I had an interesting experience in my 30s. I came to Europe, worked on the continent for a while. And I think that in general, I would say, this is, sweeping generalization, but in general, I think the Europeans have a more developed sense of work-personal balance than the Americans do. And my staff in Europe made it very clear to me that, that they did not want to work American hours. They weren't working nights. They weren't working weekends. And it really forced me to strike a different work-personal balance. But I also found that the work got done. And that was really an epiphany for me, I think, and a life-changing experience, I think, going through that experience, working with the Europeans and seeing a different approach to work-personal balance.
Yeah, I think that's a massive point, actually. And in terms of Europe, the UK are definitely, us, we're the odd ones out in terms of how we work. We're very much like the Americans.
Yeah.
We work hard, whereas you look at Spain. Life's very relaxed. You go for an espresso in the morning and maybe a half a beer in the afternoon, and like you say, though, the work still gets done.
Yeah.
Which is true when you put it like that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've really focused on at Arcutis is in knowledge-based businesses like biotech, right? It's not actually the inputs that matter; it's the outputs. So if the work is getting done, I honestly don't care where or when or how long it took the person to get the work done. I just care that the work got done on time and well, right? And so we tend not to focus so much on hours worked and when people are working and so forth. We focus on, this is what we need you to do when we need you to do it. Now get on with it and let us know when you're done.
Yeah, I think that's something we're really trying to do here at Avetix. So I came from a company where it was like, very structured hours. You come in at this time, you leave at this time. This is when your lunch is, which for an industry like mine doesn't really make any sense, especially when I'm working the North American market from the UK. So that that really strikes a chord with me, because what we're doing here at Avetix is flexible hours. You work when you need to work. You might have your really busy weeks where you're absolutely flat out, but then, like, for example, when everyone was at JPM the other week, it's a quiet week for me, because everyone that I normally speak to is a lot busier. So yeah, I think you take it in your stride. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think there's it gets back to a comment you made earlier about trust as well, right? If you hire really good people, if you're not hiring entry-level people, you hire them because they're good at their jobs, right? You have to trust them to do their jobs and not micromanage them all the time. And if you don't trust your employee, then you probably have the wrong employee, right? The answer isn't to put more controls around them; it's to get the right person that you do trust. And if someone's not performing, then the answer again is to, the first thing is to have a conversation with them about their performance. But if they're continuing not to perform, you replace them. You don't put more controls around them, right? That's not going to solve the problem at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely. Then yeah, I wanted to finish it on quite a nice question. If you could give one tip to your younger self, what would it be?
Oh, I would say if I could do it all over again, it gets back to your earlier question about work-personal balance. I would not have worked as hard, and I would have spent more time with my family, especially my kids.
Yeah, I think that says it all. Yeah. But look, thanks so much for coming on today, Frank.
It's a real pleasure talking with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I found it so interesting, and I'm sure everyone will in terms of the people listening.
Well, I folks who take the time to listen find some nugget that made it worth their while.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks
Thank
for listening, guys. Bye.
Right.